we're going to move on very quickly so that we can try and keep a little bit more to time. And we're going to go straight across. We've only got Ben today out of our duo that's coming up next, but he will definitely be good enough for both of them. So when you're ready.
Thank you, Jenny. Can you see my screen?
Yes, I can.
Okay, let me hide all of that. Okay, thank you, everyone. Yeah, I'm afraid it is just me today. Jim's been called away at the last minute, but I will do my best to represent the work and the idea that we wanted to share. You will actually see some other names on the screen. So we've got Tara Chataway, who is from the Thomas Pocklington Trust, George Rhodes, who leads on digital accessibility at the University of Westminster, and then me and Jim Tyson and me, Ben Watson, representing UCL. So this was a little bit of a team effort to look at how we might create a baseline standard for STEM materials in education. The idea being that I think there are lots of different routes into this, and I think some of them are very quickly become quite complex, and perhaps if you're not somebody who is a STEM practitioner, where would you even start imagining how to make some of this more accessible? So what I'm going to show you today is our initial idea of how we might create this baseline, and effectively it's a cry for help as well, that we would love people to be involved. And what we've done is a starter for 10, but what we'd really like is if we can kind of crowdsource this and work our way collectively towards a shared understanding of what some of those baseline standards would be for accessible STEM materials. So science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and medicine materials. And if we can get to that point, then of course we can then create shared guidance materials, because we'll all be designing to the same minimum standard, and that would potentially, I think, turbocharge our progress as a sector and mean that we're not kind of duplicating effort, by everybody writing a guide on how to write an accessible Word document, because we can have one document that we all contribute to that becomes the kind of industry standard. And it's really interesting hearing Cordelia there, because I think those universal design elements that she's mentioned fit beautifully into what we're going to talk about now, or I'm going to talk about now. So the like I say, it was a small group of us got together, including the Thomas Pocklington Trust, who are like a charity that look after the interests of blind and partially sighted people in education. And we had a focus group that was hosted by the Thomas Pocklington Trust from students, current and former students, but also there were industry professionals there. We had people from the BBC, for example, who are blind and visually impaired people in industry, telling us what the challenges they experience. So the guidance and the baseline has been written from a point of view of trying to address some of the key issues that those groups made us aware of during those focus groups. A little bit more on the Thomas Pocklington Trust, that they run a helpline and a support desk for blind and partially sighted students. And as we say here, one of the main issues that students contact them about is accessibility, including when studying STEM subjects. Not being able to access information means that students do not have access to all the materials their peers do, spend a lot of time chasing resources, and this impacts on their ability to study, their uni experience, and their mental health. And some of the solutions are not that complicated. And actually, the baseline we're proposing is really baseline. I think it's a very reasonable set of things that we could all do, that by no means is going to fix the entire STEM kind of landscape. I mean, I think we've seen already today some of the very real challenges of the complexity of the information. However, I think what it will do is to stop us creating roadblocks unnecessarily, that we can design information in such a way that we don't inadvertently stand in the way of all of the kind of brilliant ongoing remediation that could potentially happen, because we put in some unfortunate barriers early on in our design. Okay, so who is it for? Well, I think it's for a range of people, but particularly students, to give them a sense of what is a reasonable expectation that they can be expecting, not just from their own university, but from the sector as a whole. And again, I think if there is a sort of sector minimum standard for this, it gives us all something to work towards collaboratively, to share ideas and help everybody reach that minimum level of expectation. And that obviously supports cross collaboration and sharing of resources, because we're all expecting things at the same sort of level. We've already seen today the brilliant work at York from those York students about students themselves creating accessible content, so that we're creating a generation of graduates who go off into the world already equipped to do this. So we're not adding to further challenges of legacies of inaccessible content. And for practitioners, I think that thing I mentioned right at the beginning, that, well, where do you even start? If we had a central baseline that people could say, well, look, I've done those things in my document, so that I'm doing a sensible amount of the things that would be the most impactful things that I could do, given that I've, like all academics, very limited on time and all of the things that we have to manage. Okay. So the draft proposal has been broken down into the following kind of sections, and it's all hosted on something called Make Things Accessible, which is a website that has been set up by all of the the key stakeholders you've heard today, and quite a large group of London universities. There's actually a group called the London Digital Accessibility Working Group that involves Imperial, City, UCL, Westminster, Birkbeck, quite a lot. And so we've all kind of created this central repository of what we hope could be baseline information, not just for STEM, but for all sorts of accessibility issues, with a view to creating that shared repository that we can all crowdsource, keep up to date, and then refer to centrally. So my ultimate vision would be we have one single document across our sector that talks about how to create accessible Word documents, how to write accessible PDFs, that sort of thing. So I think it would save us all an awful lot of time, and as I say, it would create that opportunity to standardize. So we've got mathematical specific technical content, data visualizations, tables, scientific images, scientific video, a little bit on maps, and something about coding as well. So for each one, we will outline what some of the accessibility challenges are and set that minimum expectation of what we think is a reasonable level for people to be working at and delivering their content in, and give them practical guidance on how to do that. In many cases, that links back to the brilliant site that Lillian has created, where we've got good guidance, but it gives us this kind of almost a set of signposts to bring people into that more higher level complex guidance, but in a friendly introductory way via the baseline. Each of the guides within it are available as web or Word kind of access. You can download them if you wish to, and of course they can all be adapted for local purposes. I understand that having a central guide is great in theory, but sometimes you might need to reflect local login information and stuff like that. So I think that should work well for people, and as long as people are using the essential same structure of the baseline and referring back to it so people know where it's come from, I think we can then still harness those powers of standardization as a community. I mentioned maps, just this is a little shout out. Unfortunately, George isn't with us today, but George is doing from the University of Westminster is doing some really amazing work in the creation of 3D printed tactile maps, and the facility that he is finding for this, for creating floor plans, for creating cell diagrams, structures, pie charts. I think we've got their cross section of a bone. It's really quite flexible, and actually these things can be created really quite quickly. So I think particularly in STEM, where we've got very complex visual information to communicate, where perhaps the association between the navigation of where different elements kind of sit in relationship to each other. I think a tactile approach is potentially very helpful, and George's work, which is reflected in Make Things Accessible, is I think providing some really interesting ways to make 3D printing a genuine solution to some of these problems. Okay, so what do we want? Where are we going with this? So I think the immediate thing is, I think we would love people to start having a look at the proposal in Make Things Accessible, understand how we can share it, we can get buy-in from people creating these resources, crucially from people consuming these resources. Let's stimulate this discussion together and understand, well, what's missing. You know, like I said, we've done what we think is a sort of minimum viable product starter for 10, but I would love it if this is something that we could build and develop as a community. So the site has been built in such a way that it will support this crowdsourcing idea, but I think the initial steps would be for us to all agree, you know, once we've arrived at a standard that we think, or a baseline that we think is something that we could all adopt, maybe to sort of publicly, you know, centrally endorse it and adopt it as a group of universities, or ideally the whole sector. And then that gives us something to work towards. And as I say, then a set of documents can be created to support the rollout and meeting of the standard or the baseline, but in a really consistent way, because we're all meeting the same baseline. The guidance that we use with our staff and students can be the same to get us to that place. Longer term, I would love something like these baselines to be referenced in things like the TEF, Teaching Excellence Framework, and the Research Excellence Framework as a further way to validate and value the fact that people are moving forward in this area in a sort of systematized way. I think that would be a really good way potentially to get the attention of senior leaders in universities as well, if there was a kind of impact on the bottom line of the TEF, whether somebody had clearly been able to show that they have adopted and met the baseline standard. And of course, that could then develop with ever more challenging and higher level goals as we move on. So we'd love people to talk to us about this, you know, get involved, you know, have a look at makethingsaccessible.com. You'll see the STEM baseline on there. Make suggestions. What are we missing? What would you like to see? How could we roll it out? How could we adopt it? Is anyone interested in being a case study for us in you know, showing how this might work, and then we can take it forward together as a sector. So really what we've done so far is, like I say, it's just getting the ball rolling, and now it's kind of up to all of us to share the work and develop this common understanding. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ben. I think it's such an ambitious and interesting project. There's some really good links in the chat. We're going to take a very short break, just for anybody who wants to go for a quick comfort break. If you do have questions for Ben, then feel free to put them in the Q&A, because we'll collect them and respond to any questions later. Or if you have a minute now, Ben, you're welcome to answer them now. But please do be asking questions in the Q&A, because any we don't get to today, because I know we're a bit pushed for time, we will catch up with them.
Brilliant.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.